Hi guys, welcome back to another video. So today we are going to be trying out something a little bit different. So I actually received these calligraphy pens from a family friend recently, and I wanted to show you guys these pens because first, they come in a few different varieties. So it has extra fine, fine, medium, and a brush pen. The brush pens are actually all the same, so the other three nibs are all different, but the nib of these are actually very interesting, and this is kind of the reason why I wanted to show you guys. So I'm using the fine version right now, and you can see that you can get some like thinner lines, as well as if you turn it on its side you can get some really thick lines. But the thing that I like is that the nib is kind of like squishy, but not in the same way as like a normal brush pen, and it's not as firm as a fine liner. So these ones are calligraphy pens, which I think because of the main usage is supposed to be for calligraphy, that you can kind of get thick and thin kind of like in one stroke. I wanted to see how well it would kind of be like used for just normal inking. So let's move over to my sketchbook, which you can kind of see that I already did a spread of Ezra from Reverse 1999, and I've done the sketches with I think the Pilot Color ENO in the color red, just to kind of let myself focus more on the inking process rather than the sketching process. So right now I am using the fine version of the calligraphy pens, and I will be putting this mostly in time-lapse. I think in the future I will do another video where I'll talk in real time and show you guys like more of a real-time demonstration. But for I guess like today's focus, you can kind of see like just the general look of it and just the outcome that I can kind of get with this particular pen. I don't think I really switched to any other pen other than the brush tip because I wanted to fill out some larger areas. But the reason why I feel like this pen might be very fun to use in the future just for like inking, or like I kind of wish I had these pens a little bit earlier for Inktober because I think they're just super versatile. So I did have my eyes on a type of pen like this in the past, but it only came in like a pack of one, and it was a little bit on the pricier side. So I wasn't too sure whether or not the nib would be too firm, or is it more of like a very flexible nib. So this is a very good in-between. I feel like it does lean a little bit more towards a brush pen because it does have a lot of flex. It's a little bit more easier to have like line weight variation, but the firmness of it is a lot different from a brush pen. So brush pen I feel like has like the most amount of flex, as well it's very soft, but I feel like it's a little bit harder to get thin lines if you're not very steady with your hand, or if you're not used to using a brush in general. Then kind of having the control that you want with a brush pen might be a little bit difficult if you're just starting out. But this one is a nice in-between because the nib is just kind of like soft enough to have that flex where you can kind of get your nice line width variation, but it has a little bit more of like that squishier, firmer side that's like kind of akin to the fine liner tip, but it's not super firm, if that makes sense. But I'm able to get both like soft, kind of like lighter lines, as well as some bolder, thicker lines, as long as like I put more pressure down. And I do like the ink consistency in this pen as well. I also found that it dries very easily, at least on this piece, like this paper in my current sketchbook. I'm gonna see how well it fares out in my future notebooks, because did I talk about this? Most likely by the end of October, which we have, I think, just a few days left, I most likely will be able to finish off my sketchbook pretty much almost fully. I might save the last page for obviously the video for early November, and then obviously film the sketchbook tour shortly after that. So I'm super excited to kind of like hop back into a little bit of a larger sketchbook. But every time I switch sketchbooks and I feel more used to the paper, I definitely feel like I need to like relearn what mediums work the best, as well as like did I learn anything where I might feel like I can work with a medium a little bit better on a certain texture or surface of like different types of paper. So I will definitely try out this pen to see whether or not it feathers or does a lot of ghosting on the back of the notebook paper that I like to use in my current notebooks that I usually use in my other videos. But for today's session, I don't know, it was just fun to be able to ink a little bit more freely in a sense. So I've talked about this in the past before too, especially when I've been trying my best to learn a little bit more about inking and finding what I like in terms of like style, as well as like, do I want thicker lines, thinner lines? Do I want them super clean? Do I want to do hatching? Like all that stuff. I did notice that because I am a little bit impatient when it comes to working with like inking or just line art, because I tend to use my sketch as like the basis for like my digital painting. Oftentimes when I do like watercolor or just like other materials, I tend to leave like the pencil as the base, color everything on top, and do the inking afterwards. But whenever it comes to doing inking kind of like before coloring, or if ink's kind of like the main focus, I lose steam quite easily, and I find myself like basically cutting corners, trying to like force myself to do shortcuts to make the process a lot shorter. But the lucky thing about this particular pen is that I'm able to both do lines quickly and not like similar to like needlepoint pens, where I feel like the line is very uniform. So like the line width variation is very minimal. So if I want to have more line width variation, I would have to slowly build it up manually. So like darken and thicken things at certain points, and then leave things very thin with a singular line usually to show the thickness. But because this pen has the ability to do both thick and thin, and I don't feel like I'm forcing myself to make sure that I'm not putting too much pressure, it makes it a little bit easier for me to just, you know, let some of the natural line weight variation come out. But then if I really want to force it, or like, you know, make it a little bit more extreme, then I have the capability of doing it super easily, as well as like filling in a lot of the darker areas. I find this pen will be perfect for that because I don't have to switch pens constantly. I definitely think that if you want to, you can definitely switch pens, because like they give you free like brush pens anyways. So I feel like filling in like really dark black areas would be a lot easier, which you'll see me do a little bit for some of the foliage as well as the background between the characters. But I feel like I'm always in that weird spot of wanting to have enough contrast as well as like line width variation, but being able to still have some thinner lines, because I don't know if it's like the detailing, or I just like have a preference for it sometimes, especially for like the eyes or like a hatching. I definitely prefer something a little bit thinner. But it does make things a little bit more tedious whenever I want to fill in larger areas, or if I want to build up a lot of that tonal variation, or like pushing the values a little bit more. So hopefully this will make me a little bit more used to doing inking in such a way. And I feel like it's a good bridging point, like I said earlier, between like a Pentel pocket brush pen, where if you're not used to using a brush, it's definitely a bit of a learning curve, because like I guess like if you want thin lines and you're heavy-handed, it might be frustrating to use, or like even the opposite. So maybe if you're always light-handed, maybe you're not used to like kind of like the transition between a thin line and then like a thick glob of ink that can be kind of like produced from the Pentel Pocket brush pen. I've kind of used kind of like brush tips often whenever I've done watercolor and stuff, so I feel like I have an okay time using the Pentel Pocket brush pen, but I don't think I utilize it in its full potential because I'm still a little bit timid in terms of being able to, I guess, like play around with the line width variation just naturally. And I remember seeing a short about inking and how a lot of people focus on trying to get that perfect line in one go, where a lot of people who do like comic book inking, manga inking and stuff tend to build up their lines. And I did see another artist who builds up a lot of their like line width variation in a more like messier way, but they're still able to do the kind of like singular stroke with line width variation. So I definitely think like changing my perspective a little bit about inking is always just good to try out to see what works for me, and being a little bit less timid with trying to make like certain lines just in one go. I definitely think like when I was doing Ezra's mushroom hat right here, when I was doing kind of like the ridges of, or I guess like the rim of his hat, there's some areas that I did rely on doing like thin to thick when I was doing like a stroke, but I kept them like super short. And then even after that, I filled in some areas to make them even darker or even thicker so that we can kind of push more of the line width variation to be even more so than what I could do naturally with the pen. But for the most part, this makes me feel like I'm gonna have more motivations to do like inking in the future, and I want to try this out again alongside with doing screen tone so that we can kind of play around with more of that manga looking style probably in the future. I don't exactly know what I want to do for that particularly, but maybe I will try to figure out what I want to do, and maybe we can do like a larger piece with more of a focus on trying to put more value and texture both with the pen as long with the screen toning. So like I mentioned, I will in the future do a real-time session with it so that we can kind of get some real-time footage. I was going to do it for this session, but because I was like testing it out for the first time, I was not sure how well I was going to adapt using it. You can see that I switched to the brush pen to do the darker foliage and some of like the grass and stuff in the foreground just because it's a little bit easier. But then afterwards I switched back to the fine brush tip, I guess. Oh, I should have mentioned earlier. So even though I received these as a gift from a family friend, I found some other versions that you can find on Amazon, as well as I think Ohu, who actually has a pretty good set for an okay price. So definitely check it out if you want to look for a kind of like pen similar to this. I think a lot of people would benefit from using something like this, or if you're interested in calligraphy, I definitely highly recommend probably picking these up because it might be a little bit more beginner friendly compared to doing calligraphy with like fountain pens or like those kinds of thicker nibs. Because I remember doing calligraphy for, I think, one of my high school art projects. So I did a huge Just Be Friends, so like the Vocaloid song by Megurine Luca, but I had to do like the lyrics for that song, and oh boy, we had to do like 5 sheets per letter to do calligraphy just to be able to work on our final, or not our final, our rough draft. And then you had to do a almost like a perfect rough draft before we could move on to your final, before like our teacher approved it and stuff. And oh boy, remembering like the thick and thin strokes, like I think it's thin going up and thick going down usually, but like different calligraphy styles and stuff is kind of like fun to learn, but it definitely takes a lot of patience and a lot of, I guess like skill. So I definitely struggled with it a lot, and I don't think I understand it fully, but it was still fun to do in the past. Also, like, very small tip, I forgot to talk about this when it was happening on screen, but if you have anything that's similar in width to your sketchbook, as soon as you start using sketchbooks that lay down super flat, sometimes the discrepancy between like your right side and your left side becomes super great. So I highly recommend putting something underneath your hand so that you're not having to like awkwardly float your hand above in order to sketch or draw on your sketchbook like properly, if that makes sense. But this is kind of like the full spread of Ezra that I ended up doing. I'm gonna write the date at the very bottom, but also, oh, I guess I forgot what date it was, but I wanted to show you guys on the back side afterwards the kind of like the aftermath, or whether or not this had any ghosting or bleed through. So because this paper is kind of more like mixed media, thicker paper, I had not really any ghosting and there was absolutely no bleed through. So it made me happy that this paper could take it, but I'm a little bit worried about notebook paper in the future. But hopefully you guys enjoyed today's video, and I'll talk to you guys next time in the next video. Bye! Also, hopefully it will be the end of the sketchbook.